All right. Oh, hello. All right, there we go. All right, everybody.
No mic. Check.
Yeah,
There it is.
everybody here has a good mic technique.
Check.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, I want to welcome everybody out here to the Sony booth at this year's 2023 NAMM. My name's Tyler Barth. I walked my first NAMM in 2009, and it was a very different music business. So I want to share a very quick story and also remind you that today we are live streaming and let you know that the future of music creation and consumption has changed dramatically since the first time I was here walking NAMM in 2009. I will be introducing my esteemed panelists very shortly after this very short story, but I'll just let you know that in 2009, as a musician, as a music creator, it was a very different business. You know, there wasn't the DSPs. There was not the access to, if you were not signed to a major label, you were not getting the distribution and promotion that you needed. So as we talk about technology and where we are today, I read very recently a stat that we have 1 trillion streams already this year in 2023, which far exceeds the streaming of last year and the year prior. So we're already there and 3 months into the year. There's also a couple other stats I'd like to bring to the story here. Just 1% of the artists on the DSPs account for 80% of the stream plays. So that is something to take into account as we look at music creation and distribution and some of the things that we'll address here with my amazing panelists. So when I walked NAMM in 2009, I was with a company called Blue Microphones, and we were just on the front of the USB revolution of creating a mic that was on the go that allowed artists to create absolutely everywhere at any point they wanted to create. As the DSPs became a form or way of distribution, we were lucky enough to be able to give artists these microphones in their hands to be able to distribute those tracks anywhere globally. And now, in present day, there's a lot more than USB mics that are allowing artists to create and collaborate everywhere. So, without further ado, I'm going to dive into a couple bios, even though these guys don't really need bios. Everyone's very well known amongst the crew here. Tom Syrowski, who's two to my left with the mic, is an American music producer, mixer, recording engineer known for his work with Bruce Springsteen, Bruno Mars, Chris Cornell, Coldplay, Incubus, Mastodon, Pearl Jam, Prophets of Rage, David Lee Roth, Wolf Mother, and many others. Syrowski has worked on many Grammy-nominated and Grammy-winning records, including Mastodon's Sultan's Curse, Best Metal Performance, which he engineered and co-mixed with Brendan O'Brien. Frequent collaborations with Mr. O'Brien include the Super Bowl halftime shows for The Weeknd in 2021, Coldplay, Bruno Mars, and Beyonce in 2016, and Bruno Mars with the Hooligans and the Chili Peppers in 2014. Tom has worked alongside many acclaimed producers, including Daniel Limois, Don Was, John Shanks, and Justin Stanley. Numerous albums that Tom Syrowski has worked have reached #1 positions in the US and globally. And my man was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but calls LA home. John Alagia, who's to my direct left right here, is an American record producer, composer, mixer, and engineer. Alagia's worked with artists including Dave Matthews, John Mayer, Jason Mraz, Paul Simon, Herbie Hancock, Serena Ryder, Brett Dennen, Rachel Yamagata, Ben Folds, and many others. He's a 3-time Grammy nominee. He's a resident at the Village Recorder in West LA, which he uses for production, writing, and mixing. Just wrapped production on Dave Matthews Band's last album, which I believe comes out later this year in May, and has just recently mixed that album in Atmos and is going to give 360 Reality Audio a spin after this panel. Tim James is the co-founder, all the way at the end. Tim James is the co-founder of Rock Mafia, a music collective that has streamed over 30 billion streams and has sold over 100 million album singles. His most noted collaborations are with the music icons such as Miley Cyrus, Eminem, Migos, Selena Gomez, Karol G, Zedd, and Megan Thee Stallion. Tim James is a songwriter, producer, mixer, and mentor to artists of all genres. Tim was born and raised in LA, or I should say he was born in Detroit, now lives in LA. And then finally, Steve Hammonds, right next to Tim. He's a Grammy-nominated engineer and mixer, best known for his work as a collaborator at Rock Mafia with Tim James. He's a graduate of Berklee College of Music in music synthesis, and he's worked with artists such as Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, Eminem, Migos, and a bunch of other notable acts. So if you didn't know these guys, you're about to hear some wisdom from the guys that are on the street creating some of the greatest albums you've come to know and who are on the cusp of recording the stuff that you're going to be listening to down the road. So I'm going to start off with something on the easier front. And this is a question I think we've all been asked over the years. Let's start with the artists that inspired you guys as kids. You know, what got you into actually wanting to go out and produce and songwrite and collaborate, and what drives you to get out of bed every day? Who is that artist, and what was the album? You know, back when people were making albums. I'll start right now with John Alagia. Oh, yeah.
I think for me, it was definitely the Beatles. And the album that really kind of impacted me was Abbey Road. I have a hard time sometimes deciding which Beatles record is my favorite Beatles record, but they are my inspiration almost on a daily basis.
Amazing. Go ahead, Tom.
Rage Against the Machine, Tom Morello, guitar playing, Brendan O'Brien producing, Evil Empire, hands down, my biggest influence before I started working in the music. Still is, but, you know, that was the big one for me. So.
Steve.
For me, it was definitely Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Still an inspiration to this day. So,
Timmy.
Michael Jackson, Thriller. That's like, I was like a tiny child, and I knew I was going to be making music the minute I heard that music. Then as I got deeper, understanding Quincy and the relationship of the musicians and Bruce Sweetie and all those guys, that's why I'm here.
And I'll remind everybody that, I mean, it couldn't have been said better. We didn't like pre-record any of this or pre-rehearse this. These are timeless albums. These are albums that change culture. And in changing culture, that becomes a major part of the process by which what inspires you guys is songwriters and creators, and even consumers for that matter. So I'd love to jump into something a little bit more technical now, because you guys all have a home where you're creating music. And John, since you're to my left, and I'll let you guys know that I know the four of these guys extremely well, maybe over a decade each. Steve and I are a little bit newer friends, but at the end of the day, we go back to some collaborations that we had at places like the House of Rock, which was a studio I co-created with a couple other artists. And one of the things that I recognize, it's all around the environment that artists are inspired to create. So I know there was a lockdown. I know it was a time where a lot of people were going into the studio and collaborating because of, you know, where the world was. John, talk to us about your experience at the Village Recorder and how important it is for you to get out of bed and maybe go to the place to create versus creating at home, and what that process is like. And here, we'll give you that mic right there.
I've been fortunate enough to work at the Village for almost 18 years. They built me a room on the second floor, and during COVID, I moved up to the third floor, which was more the singer-songwriter floor, and we actually are kind of calling it Third Street Records now, or third floor records, because there's so much collaboration among all the rooms. There are producers and writers and artists up there, and if I need a beat from, you know, for a particular artist I'm working with, I can go take a left out of my door. If I need some guitars or anything, I can go out and take a right. But just the whole spirit of collaboration is I think it's a big shot in the arm to anyone making music. You can definitely make music in your bedroom by yourself, but I definitely think, at least in my experience, the more the merrier.
And actually, I'll riff off that. Having just finished the Dave Matthews Band latest album, that John's been fortunate enough. I mean, I'm a huge Dave Matthews fan, so I can speak to this. But this is a guy that's recorded with Dave for now 3 decades. And so, as we talk about the more the merrier and the collaboration and the recording process, I'd love you to describe what it was like to record with Dave in the 90s, and then most recognizably record with Dave, last year.
I think there have been so many changes with the recording technology. I mean, I started out with Dave Matthews in my basement. We would just sketch out tunes on a tape machine. It was a 16-track TAC tape machine, and as that was 1992. Then 1993 came along, and we started recording on ADATs, and then D88s, and then I went to Radar, then I went to Pro Tools, and I went to Logic, and I went back to Pro Tools, and I went to I ended up in Pro Tools essentially. But the thing is, these days it's so much easier to record something anywhere, because you can just carry your laptop in a small DAW and make a whole record, But back in 1992, it was a very different situation where I was such a fan of that band that I would take my tape machine. It was a big old tape machine. It weighed like 50 pounds or more, and my API outboard gear, and just set up a studio in the corner of the club wherever he was working, and I started recording his early shows. These days, it's just a lot easier, but it kept me in shape.
I think the 90s, we might even remember the Sony Discman, right? You had the Walkman and then the Discman, and that's how you were listening to Dave Matthews on the go. Yeah. Now we've got, what was the iPod, and of course, the other devices. Now we're listening through just our phones, which is crazy, our smartphones. So thanks for sharing that, John. Let's go over to Tom Syrowski here. So Tom, you are Mr. Rock and Roll. As we talked about earlier with John, Mastodon, what that must have been recording with those guys. For those unfamiliar with Mastodon, get familiar with Mastodon. That is rock and roll at its heart. What was working with Mastodon like versus some of the most recent stuff you've been doing with David Lee Roth of AC/DC?
So Mastodon, a lot more guys in the room, a lot heavier, bigger amps, high gain amps. More now than back then. It's more piecemealed together. Like, for instance, Incubus, the last stuff I did with Incubus, we recorded all their drums with nobody else in the room. A click track, we were listening to a little bit of basic guitar, and the drummer played all the drums by himself. I sent all that stuff to the bass player. He played bass, sent it to me. All went to the guitar player, came back to me. Singer's already singing on it. It's all piecemealed together. Whereas Mastodon, everybody was all in the same room at the same time. It's now way more kind of just like little snippets getting done. Can't do that with everybody, but some of those big guys you can.
I mean, I can't even imagine what that, organizing all of those.
Lots of file management.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you need an administrator. All right, so Tim, Rock Mafia. Let's talk about the collective. Let's talk about why you guys exist, the importance of the studio, but the importance of artists being able to create outside of the studio to bring those songwriting ideas into the studio. And, feel free to share a story that could span Selena Gomez, Miley, like how you guys work with them, where the studio's located, and, some of the cool things that have popped out of there.
So my partner and I had this idea or a vision to create kind of a creative campus that was kind of very open-ended, invite-only, and so we just started to collect incredible creative people around us. I think every collaboration is uniquely different. I think of being in the room with Miley while a lot of great songs are written together. Same with Selena. And in the case of Migos, getting on the phone with Coach K, and an hour later getting a voice memo and going, oh my gosh, get me the files, and can't wait for the files to come in. So, there's no rules to this, but I think having a headquarters, a place where people can come together is great to have, but it's not necessarily a must-have. I call it a like-to-have. Where I'm at in my life, it's a have to have for me. But I think that these doors that used to be closed to the consumer who wants to get in and make music themselves, these doors are opening. I love democratizing this. I think it's been good for music, and I celebrate all aspects of that.
Hammonds, you being somebody that, as we just talked about with Tom, the importance of the administrator, the guy that's organizing the files, the guy that's allowing the creatives to be creative, but really capturing the magic from an engineering standpoint of all the notes that came across from Migos and the collaboration that's going on with the collective of songwriters. What is that process like? And, maybe not the Migos example, but at any given moment, how many different songs are you guys in the middle of recording?
That number would be too high to count, but I have to keep some kind of mental record in my mind, or copious notes of even time snapshots, like, oh, we liked this version at that time. This is where we dropped in those new stems, so there might have been an arrangement change. So just making sure that I'm on top of all those different snapshots of time and all the songs. It's kind of crazy at times, but just got to keep a handle on that.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, having been a part as sort of an executive producer in a lot of studios, just bringing up the right track is sometimes one of the most important elements, because if you're playing to that track and then it's not the right track, you got a problem. All right, so Tim. Oh, okay, all right. Looking at my notes right here. All right, so John, let's go to Studio J at the Village. We talked about some collaborations. Now, how often are the guys that you're producing, engineering, mixing, coming into the Village and recording versus stuff that you're actually bringing to the Village? And are you doing sessions with them where they're online? Like, what is the process like? I mean, did Dave Matthews come out to LA at all to be at the Village?
Dave Matthews did come out to LA, but the record was actually made over a few years' time, because we were taking material that was recorded 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I was almost kind of like the overseer, like the EP. I wrote on the record and I also produced on the record. But with Dave Matthews, he would come into the studio. He'd do strings in the big room. He would do most of his vocals at home, but the majority of the record was very much like what you were doing with Incubus, and just we would send files to Charlottesville, and they'd record the drums, and they'd do the same thing. Just because it was COVID, everyone had to do theirs separately, and it was a very, well secured way of recording.
Yeah.
So nowadays, like we're back to where we were before COVID, and it's just it's kind of like everyone's running all over the place, and it's a hell of a lot more fun.
Yeah, it is a lot more fun. To me, for having been a part of a lot of sessions, it felt like the more the merrier. And, when, Tom, you were at Henson recording, I feel like the more the merrier was sort of the theme, right? Because Henson Studios, for those that have not recorded there, has multiple studios. And it feels like a lot of those rooms have brought some of the greatest rock and rollers together just by the community of Henson. Talk to us about some of those stories. And after we establish this, the baseline of where we're at right now, we're going to talk about the future. I think it's important before you dive in to establish a baseline of what it's been like over the last couple years to create, and in some cases decades, and then talk about the exciting things that we're looking forward to in the future collaborations and where the music's going, especially on the consumption side. So we'll get there after Tom shares the story.
So Henson Recording Studios used to be A&M Records. So if you want to talk about collaborations, We Are the World, one of the biggest collaborations of a bunch of different musicians ever to happened in Studio A there. So that's, you know, that's sort of like, boom, that's a great collaboration. But speaking to my experience, because I was not around for that, I think I was 5 or 6 when that happened, so I would have not been there. When I first started working as an assistant there, one of the first producers I worked for was Brendan O'Brien. We were doing an Audio Slave record, and the plan was to do the Audio Slave record, finish that, and start an Incubus record right after that. That would have been the Revelations album, and then we were going to do Light Grenades right after that. Well, Revelations took too long, so all of the overdubs that we were finishing had to get moved to another room because Incubus was coming into Studio D, and so all of a sudden we were in Studio B finishing the Audio Slave record, doing guitar solos. That was actually the first time I actually engineered anything for Brendan O'Brien. Was vocal overdubs, just me and Chris in the room, guitar overdubs, me and Tom in the room. And simultaneously, Incubus started that record, and it was just like a lot of back and forth. There's little secret pathways in that studio. There's a lot of, you know, great rock was always up and down the hallways in that studio, and still is to this day.
I think we've all heard if those walls could talk, we'd have endless books that we could read diving into that. And these are the guys around. I mean, Tom, you might have been a young guy, but at the very least you heard some of the stories that preceded you. And I'm sure you got a kick out of them. The ones that we will not be sharing on the record.
Right.
I'm curious, this is off the cuff, Tim. I know you and Antonina and the crew at Rock Mafia got a chance to work with Zed. And as we look at the movement of DJ music being produced and played and how important the production side of that is, walk us through the workflow of, you know, the stuff that we've heard Zed produce and, of course, play in Vegas at his residency and around the world in front of hundreds of thousands of people. The genesis starts in the studio, right? So walk us through what that process is like.
So working with someone like Zed, he's a musical genius. And so however we can help is how the process goes. In the case of True Colors, it was a piano vocal that Auntie and I had created, and he just loved the record. He took the piano, the vocal, and we all worked collaboratively finishing that song. But in the case of Beautiful Now, to be fair to him, it was just an a cappella, and he went crazy. He flipped the arrangement. He did a lot of things to the record that when I first heard it, I couldn't believe where he took it. So there's both, you know, one-on-one or two-on-one in the case of Antina and myself, deep collaboration, working on a song, and sometimes it's just letting the genius do his thing, giving him some elements to work with, and then, you know, part of the excitement is you have no idea where it's going, but if Zed's in charge, it's going to be great. And so that's been our experience with Zed. So.
That's a great story, and I also think letting the musical genius flourish in an environment where he can be creative. I've been to the Rock Mafia studio complex, and it's incredible. It sits in Santa Monica, very near the village where John works. We're connecting the west side here. We know a lot happens on the west side, but a lot happens on the east side, as Tom will let you know. You know, I personally, as a huge music fan, was really like flabbergasted getting the opportunity to walk NAMM after a hiatus last year, and coming in and seeing the Sony booth and looking at some of the tools that Sony was creating for artists to be at their creative best. Personally, having experienced 360 Reality Audio and others like Dolby Atmos, there is a sense of where music is probably going or inevitably going. I've read and experienced, files to the metaverse and AR, VR, gaming, live broadcasts, live events that allow us to recognize that the magic that these guys are creating in the studio or even on the road in some cases. I know, for instance, Zed is as much creating on the road because he's touring nonstop, only to bring the magic back into the studio. But as we look at tools that allow us to expand and give the consumer something that they've never experienced before, let's start with 360 reality audio, or just mixing in immersive. I mean, yes, Sony and 360 reality audio have a very close relationship. But just generally speaking, how many of you guys have actually had an opportunity to utilize the software and the plugin? And if you've used Atmos or whatever else, I'm interested in where you guys think, being the creators that are bringing this to life on the mixing front, like, what is this giving you to show off your art? And I'll go with John, since I know John just recently mixed in Atmos and soon to be 360 reality audio. I now know what to give him for his birthday.
I can't wait to try 360 audio. I'm also a newbie at Dolby Atmos. I had Matt Wallace and Will Kennedy kind of shepherd me into Atmos, and those guys are so good. I mean, they're advanced, and for me, and I know we spoke about this earlier, there's just that issue of breaking down that Atmos mix into the binaural, into headphones. And my observation has been that they're lovers and they're haters. There's no one in the middle of this thing. I'm tend to be on the lover. I mean, I think it's fantastic. I love being in the room. I do think that as long as you can code it correctly so that your binaural works, you're out of the weeds. But I'm still learning.
All right, so Tim, I know you've been using it, you and Steve, 360 reality audio. Give us your take on what your experience was with it and where you think it's going to be going as you work with more and more artists and think about maybe even 360 from conception versus just the mixing side.
Yeah, so the cool thing about all of this stuff is that it gets us an opportunity to change the medium. I think Kubrick's search through film was always, how do we change the way we make a film? And I think this technology is giving us kind of a path, but it's early. I think, if I were to weigh in on Atmos, look, if you've got the 15 speakers and you are listening to someone who really knows how to do what they're doing, it's an unbelievable listening experience. Where I get into, I have enough problems with stereo, to be honest. It's a tough enough game. But I do love what's happening with the 360 because I feel it and hear way more potential on the headphone side than I do with Atmos. And they both are great for what they are. But playing with 360, I start to think, wow, you can really get into placing music up, down, behind you, in front of you with the headphones. Now, I know it's early, but if it's fulfilling its potential, this is powerful stuff. And I think we were talking about it like, okay, we're dealing with stuff that was recorded with the concept of being in stereo or multiple speakers. But 360 is giving us a whole nother concept of what if we record this with the inception, at inception, the idea of placement, and then making maybe a mental or just a simple diagram of where and when in the room it was recorded, and then bringing that back into the mixing process with 360. The mics were there, and we're putting them there in 360, it's probably even more impactful. So we're going to start experimenting with that, which is pretty exciting. But early days, but super exciting and a lot of potential.
And from a consumer side, how many people out here have experienced 360 reality audio, just from a consumption side? And for those that have had that luxury, since you're one of the first, as we're just getting going, I mean, how many of you have felt that if things are going in that direction, you're excited to consume more and more content and music, even if it's not music focused, just audio focused? I mean, we can all agree that that is the future. And And again, time will tell. I thought when I tasted it last year for the first time, we'd be talking about it full throttle everywhere. But like anything, things take time. You gotta make sure that people are hearing what they need to hear, and it's a good representation of what the audio is, and make sure it's in the right context. For a lot of people that have tried it, I've actually heard a common theme that there's actual goosebumps that pop up just because you can't even believe that music can touch you the way it just touched you. And I actually just got goosebumps talking about that. Tom Syrowski, I'm interested, as you are a rock aficionado and rock producer and rock engineer and mixer, how do you think 360 and immersive audio is going to change the way we listen to rock and roll? Because that is a powerful medium.
So just in my experience with making rock records, there's always a lot of guitars. And just in the stereo field of mixing, there's always this place where you get to where there's just too many guitars. You want another guitar? The guy's always got another guitar to record. And you have to find a way to make it so that they hear that, because it's the last thing they did, so it's the most important thing in the mix. And so there's lots of things that we do to figure that sort of thing out in the stereo field, but I think that with 360 audio, you're going to be able to place things all over the place, and that really great guitar part that he loves that may or may not be the focal point of the song or make the song or break the song, you can just kind of place it wherever and hear it just fine.
Yeah. So processing speed and rendering time is obviously a big component because an MPEG-H file is pretty large in the grand scheme of things. So as you take files into a place like the metaverse or AR, VR, live streaming, live anything, there's always been this lag time. So now that the processing speed is officially there, it allows the artist to express themselves without the flaws of a two-second latency issue. And so I personally, as a music consumer, am extremely excited. I can't say that I'm on the production side of things, but I do love bringing songwriters together. One thing Sony is focused on is bringing a collective of music creators together and giving them the tools to consume that audio. There are new headphones that a few of you guys have tried today. There's a virtual mixing environment that I know Steve just got a chance to demo. Steve, give us your personal experience with the virtual mixing environment and see if you can translate what that is for those that are streaming that have no idea what Sony just released.
So it was actually a pretty awesome experience. Ross gave me a demo along with the team, and they played me some reference music through speakers. Thank you. Music through speakers, and then duplicated that experience using these microphones that they placed in my ears. Then they were able to use these new open back headphones to duplicate that experience, and it was pretty cool to think of the application of, taking the model of your mixing room or your most comfortable listening environment and being able to duplicate that and be, you can listen anywhere, apply notes or changes to a mix, or even just enjoy music anywhere where you're most comfortable doing that. And I think taking those headphones and also applying the 360 RA mixing environment can be a really powerful tool to just immerse yourself in that in that mix. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm excited for everybody else here to demo it, and for those in the audience that haven't experienced this yet, please sign up. I promise you will drop off your chairs. So I'm going to hype it, but, I get excited as just a consumer knowing that through the MDR MV1s, which is the new release from Sony, the open back headphones that actually are very reasonable at retail that allow you to hear literally. I've heard a few headphones that maybe were like $2,500 back in the day. And honestly, the headphones were beautiful, but they were really, really heavy. One thing I love about these headphones is
Super light.
They're like half a pound, maybe less. You don't even know they're on your ears. So how important are headphones in music consumption and actually creation, and what role have they played for you, John? In the studio, outside the studio, as a consumer, as a creator, as a co-creator?
I think headphones are awesome. I mean, I think that the experience is always great. I have a few sets of headphones that I use. I know that when I cut vocals, I always yield to the artist to see if they want to do monitors, you know, and or if they want to do headphones. But, you know, a headphone will inspire people to have an exceptional performance. I mean, the headphones have got to be really, really great.
Yeah, that's Tom. How about you?
I was thinking about this and headphones and Atmos and all of this stuff, and I can't think of a time where I ever have the time to just sit in one place and listen to music. I have listened to Atmos. I've sat in a room. Sounds great. Rocket Man's amazing. Stuff's flying all over the place. But I listen to music mostly on headphones. So I find it to be one of the most important things for me when it comes to consuming music. So, and to speak to the recording process, I more and more, when I'm doing vocals, like to be in the same room with the singer. Not have them off in an ISO booth, glass between us. I want to be able to take my headphones off, talk to them. So having headphones working that way, not working on speakers, I think is super important. And so headphones to me, I mean, I have a big old JBL 4311, you know, record player set up at home. I don't sit in front of that thing, really. I walk around listening to music on headphones.
Yeah.
So
we can't ignore the elephant in the room when we talk about the future of music creation. And one thing that I think we've all had an experience with is just a discussion around some of the stuff that's made by humans and some of the stuff that's not made by humans. And I want to just talk about humanizing the narrative of what's going to connect a fan to the art of music. We talked at the very beginning about collaboration and the importance of that. We talked about what it's like, maybe not talking about the coffee at the Village, but like going to the coffee machine and grabbing the coffee and sitting on a couch where you co-wrote an incredible song. As a music fan who has recognized the future of where some music will go, I personally have recognized the importance of the humanized story of where the song was born, how it was born, collaborations that lend to that conversation, and also protecting the integrity of the art that is created by the human. So as we look to close this very exciting panel out where we want to have, you know, a couple good laughs, is there anything that again, this is a very broad conversation, but like, what are some things you are most excited about that sort of go back to the root of why you're the musician that you are, that you're the artist, engineer, producer, and I guess you could say why we are all entrepreneurs as musicians, as songwriters. It used to be staying in one lane. You were a producer and that's all you were. Now every producer I know is a mixer. He's mixing in Immersive. You know, Tom, you know, started out as an engineer. This is a very loaded question. I think I've asked like 30 things in there. But as we plant seeds and we talk about the person that gets to do it all, what are you most excited about with where the music creation side is going? And then if there's something you want to talk about maybe on the consumption side too. And Steve, you're just hanging out there, so I'm going to call on you first. I mean, it doesn't matter what you might have read. It could just be the gut after 40 minutes of just hanging with us that gives you the instinct to think that this is a brighter future ahead because of conversations like this. And you could just say what Tyler said, but pick your own words.
I still think this hasn't really changed for me, but the most exciting thing is just still finding, you know, untapped talent that's out there and creating with them and helping their visions come to light and bring it to the widest audience.
and finding that talent, not just because they're in LA, right? I mean, we've ignored the conversation around promotion around social media and what that's been able to do for artists. I mean, there's literally an entire genre of TikTok artists that have a very successful career, but if you're not on TikTok, you actually don't know the music. So, where things are going and where you're finding those artists, I'd be curious to integrate into sort of the final comments that you guys are making. We've got about 4 minutes left.
I think what I'm most excited about is the promise of submersive experiential kind of consumption, right? And so 360, Atmos, these are really exciting things. And I think the other thing that I'm very excited about is the power in the prompt for AI and empowering artists through prompt rather than necessarily picking up an instrument and so it gets into that DJ culture where a DJ understands the rhythm coming from that record at 78 BPM, flip to 120, and then you take that reggae guitar and flip it into that tempo. Well, now with an AI tool, we can now prompt. It's endless. I mean, the potential is mind-blowing. And so I get giddy playing a little bit with the Google AI Music app, and I think OpenAI is just starting, and Sony actually has a really good one too. I just think that's really exciting for the future music makers, because I came up and it was a guitar, it was a sampler, it was physically playing the instruments, and there's a beauty to that art, and musicianship is always going to be very important, but there's something that hasn't happened with this prompt idea, and I think that's going to take music to some places maybe instruments limit us, and so the prompt is a new promise, and I'm excited to see what happens.
I love that insight. Tom, John?
What I'm most excited about is the fact that I no longer really need a big SSL or a bunch of vintage gear to make a record. I've been making records at Henson for years. I know how to do that. Now it's sort of like when I was in high school and I had a band and we were in the basement and we were trying to make a recording. Except now you've got like Apollos with all these crazy, amazing gear, whatever all the Neve stuff that's in there, all the different compressors. I've done a lot of stuff just in people's basement, and it all sounds really good. And it makes it so that I can work with bands that are great, that don't necessarily have the budget to go into a Henson or to go into a Village. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Amazing. Thanks, Tom. John?
Steve, you took the words out of my mouth. I think that mentoring is my favorite thing in the world, like just really helping develop a young artist and challenging them and trying to get the best out of them. That never gets old to me. And I think Rick Rubin has an amazing podcast that's out recently with Barry Weiss, and I think it's important for people to think about the individuality and go with their guts and not really chase trends, but just go with what you think is right, and don't go with what you think other people think is right. Rick Rubin is a very wise man, and I think if you get a chance, you should check out that podcast.
I love that. I'll just touch on one final thing, and then we'll close out the podcast. I think one of the recurring themes that I've heard is just authenticity, right? And finding tools that allow you to be your most authentic self. What drives you to get to the studio or that area that you're creating, and letting that tool allow you to collaborate in the most seamless way when you're looking at the guy across the room, or maybe even over Zoom or some other way that you're co-creating. But I just want to thank Sony so much for what they've been able to do over the years and giving us the thrill of listening to a Walkman, to a Discman, and all the different products that they've been able to give us. It's an honor to host this as your moderator in the Sony booth, and on behalf of my amazing esteemed panelists, thank you all for coming out and supporting us today. Thank you, John. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tim. There you have it, the future of music creation and consumption. On time.